the formals now. So Tracy, meet Wendy. Wendy, meet Tracy.
Hi, Wendy.
Tracy Patterson is a nutritionist and a personal trainer with a wealth of experience from many years working within the medical industry. Her depth of knowledge when it comes to nutrition is outstanding. It's far, far better than mine, if I'm honest. It's where you've sort of specialised, and I know you have a massive passion in it. Trained with the Advanced Coaching Academy, which is one of the UK's sort of most reputable nutrition coaching companies, under a guy called Phil Looney. So a real good pedigree there, just so you know that you're getting genuine, knowledgeable, good quality information here. We're going to be talking about metabolic adaptation and what that actually is and what it means. I'm very conscious that I don't know your level of nutritional knowledge, Wendy, so we're going to try and keep it as in as much layman's terms as possible, but I'm quite happy to have some more specific terminology in there, because I think it's good to know. So when you hear people talking about these terms, even if you don't necessarily have to know in depth all the biology of it, you've got an understanding of what it is. But if at any time there's any terms that we use that you're not sure of, ask. There's no point in sitting there worrying and wondering. But in essence, I think probably the best thing to do is if I try and find natural gaps in the training, to pause and see if you've got any questions or you want anything clarifying, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds very good.
Fantastic. So I'm going to sort of hand over the reins to Tracy to start the training. I will interrupt because it's just part of who I am. I can't help it. But I will try not to interrupt as much as I did on Sunday. Over to you, my darling. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Bev, and hi, Wendy.
Hi.
So, as Bev said, please, I'm going to try and keep it simple. Some of the terminology I think is important, as Bev said, because it's the type of thing that you'll come across. But I think the first thing to talk about, because this is all about metabolic adaptation, so I think the first thing to talk about is what is the metabolism. And on a basic level, the metabolism is the process by which the body takes in food and drink and converts it into energy to fuel the processes that keep the body essentially alive on a day-to-day basis. So things like driving nutrients into cells, the making of hormones, and something as simple as what we call the basal metabolic rate. So that's the essential functions such as blood circulation, digestion, breathing, that sort of thing. But I think the basal metabolic rate is controlled by a number of factors. So you've got your body composition, and you've got sex, and you've got age. But essentially what all that boils down to is your genes. And we are given a set of genes. There's not an awful lot we can do about it. We are, I always say, unique on the inside chemically as we are on the outside physically. So there's not an awful lot we can do to affect our metabolism. And you won't get two people with the same metabolism unless they are, I suppose, identical twins. We can't do an awful lot about our genes, but there are lots of things that we can do to improve the signaling of our genes within our body. So lifestyle factors, we can decide what we eat, we can decide whether we are physically active or not, smoke, etc. But I think often when metabolism is talked about, we talked about in the context of weight loss or being able to lose weight. And you'll hear people say, Jane, she has no problem losing weight. She's got a fast metabolism. And then conversely, you'll have people say, oh, well, I can't lose weight because I've got a slow metabolism. But the reality is that all that means is that you've just got to adjust what you take in as energy according to the speed of your metabolism. And there are certain conditions that do impact on metabolism, medical conditions such as like hyper and hypothyroidism. You've got Cushing's disease, PCOS. But the thing with those conditions as well is that if they are properly medicated and managed, then there is no reason why they are affecting, again, the metabolism in a negative way. It just means that, again, it's understanding what that metabolism means to you. And as I say, it is different from individual to individual. So then when we get on to looking at specifically diets, so what we have is something what's called the first law of thermodynamics, and that's all to do with energy balance. And when we look at energy balance, we're looking at energy in, which is your food intake, and energy out, which is your physical activity, which can be made up of just day-to-day movement or time, as I say, in the gym. So if we take in more energy than we need, and we are not expending that energy, then we gain weight, and the other way around, if we don't have a lot of intake of food, but we have a high physical activity, then we lose weight. So it's all about sort of energy in versus energy out, and that can be affected by dieting, but it also can be affected so you don't necessarily need to lose weight by going on a diet. You could actually create that energy deficit by actually more physical activity. So does that make sense? So oftentimes when we think about dieting, I think it conjures up a lot of feelings, and I'm just going to throw this one over to Bev. So Bev, if I said to you the word diet, what do you tend to mind when you think of dieting?
I think of restriction. I think of missing out. I think of pain or discomfort. I think of being hungry. There's very few positive terms that I relate to diet.
Yeah, and I think the thing is with the diet, people think there's a starting point and there's an end point, and I think it also there's a lot of elimination in there, so things that you can't have. And I think the reality is that a lot of people lose weight on a diet, but the problem is it's keeping that weight off and maintaining that that weight at a steady weight. And the statistics show that actually, and it backs that up, that only around 5% of people will actually manage to keep that weight off. So just looking at the statistics, I think in the first year, it's 50 to 70% of people who have lost the weight will regain the weight. In year 2, 85% of those people, and by year 3, 95% of those people will have actually regained that weight. So it's quite it's quite worrying that it's such a low number. And I think what's even more concerning is the fact that between a third and 2/3 of people who lose the weight actually regain the weight, and they actually gain more. So they're actually worse off than when they started. And then they get into this cycle of constant dieting, which we come to know as yo-yo dieting, where you lose the weight, you regain it, you lose the weight. And there's been so many diets over the years. So I know, Bev, you talked about in your I think on your Facebook, when you introduce yourself, you talk about the battles that you had with losing weight. And I think you did Joe Wicks's plan. And
I've done them all.
Yeah, and
I've done them all.
And me too. Over the years, until I understood a lot more about what actually dieting was doing to the body, I've tried them all as well. And I think the thing is that you probably be hard pushed not to find somebody at this minute if you ask, that isn't on a diet. And the reality is that 89% of women, because it does tend to be a female thing, at some point in their lifetime have been on some sort of food restriction, and it's almost become normal behavior. That's the worrying thing. It's just class. Somebody's on a diet, it's no big deal. It's just what they do. And there are some really, over the years, there's been some really bizarre diets, and I had to chuck these ones in there because there's the tapeworm diet. Eating tapeworms, I know, but this is how desperate people get.
I heard a brilliant one today. I was listening to a podcast. I don't know if you listened to Scott Bapty, but he had a doctor on, a surgeon, and he's calling BS on a lot of the sort of the bulletproof coffees and all the rest of it. But the best one he was talking about was the celery juice diet.
Oh, God.
Now, the idea being is that this guy who's promoting this celery juice miracle has, by his own admission, no nutritional knowledge, no medical knowledge, no sort of science backing, no evidence base. But they're saying basically, if you have a cup of juiced celery, can't add anything else to it, can't put it in a smoothie, and you can't eat the celery, it has to be juiced.
Just the juice.
And you have a cup of celery juice on an empty stomach, the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, you will cure cancer, you will lose weight, you will cure coronary heart disease, And this guy is, this guy's out there saying he doesn't have any medical background, but he's called the medical medium because he reckons he gets messages from the spirits, and he's given this message to, and I was listening to it thinking this is bizarre, but sadly, I mean, that's an extreme, but people are desperately sort of grasping at extreme ways of losing weight. Because they're desperate for change.
Yes, yeah. And one of the ones I was going to mention, which you might like this one, Bev, but back in the 60s, there was a diet called the drinking man's diet. And that was basically a diet where you could drink as much gin and vodka as you liked. And the guy who promoted that diet sold 2 million copies of his book because, again, it's this desperation to find something that works. And there are so many diets out there. I think there's as many diets in the universe as there are stars in the sky. I mean, it is just ridiculous. And some of them, the ketogenic diet, which I think is really popular at the minute, the paleo diet, have some benefits, but there are so many fads out there. There's, I think, the alkaline diet, which a lot of celebrities follow, which has got no basis in science whatsoever. There's things like, I think there was the South Beach diet. There was, there's been lots of different diets that have come and gone. But I think
the problem is, though, Tracy, a lot of them do work.
That's right.
In terms of losing weight.
That's right. Yeah.
That they do actually shed weight. The problem is that it's not a healthy way to lose weight, and it's not sustainable.
And that's the key. It's the long term. It's the sustainability. And I think you hear of all these celebrities in particular. You see them in the magazines, on TV. They lose the weight, and you see the before and afters, but you don't see the after the after. You never get to see what happens 6 months down the line. Or I was going to say the likes of Oprah Winfrey, you do, because you see her. She's been
open about it,
diet for years and years. So she is evidence that it works, but it doesn't work in the long term. So if somebody like her, with all of the the money and the resources that she's got, can't do it, then it just makes you think, well, what chance do us, dare I say, normal sort of human beings have?
Mere mortals. I think the thing is, though, so you said at the beginning that weight loss is about energy balance and tipping the energy balance in favor of either a weight loss or a weight gain.
Yeah.
Now, I totally agree. From a science point of view, that is the physics of losing weight is indisputable. Whatever people say about hormones and any other factor, the truth is that you cannot change that law of thermodynamics.
Exactly.
It's the law of energy. It's just the way it is. There are, of course, socioeconomic factors. There are emotional factors. There are lots of other things that come in to play when it comes to losing weight. So I think what I want to kind of clarify here is that what we're talking about tonight is the physical response to weight loss.
Yes.
The emotional response to weight loss is going to be another training. I don't want it to seem like we're oversimplifying, because that can almost feel like, well, you do this and you get the results, because actually there's far more goes on. But understanding what happens when we cut calories to whatever level is really important to understand if we want long-term success.
Yes, and I think the thing is, women adapt harder to dieting than men, and that's because we're important for the survival of the human race. So we have evolved to become very good at not losing weight or losing fat, because ultimately it's not about weight loss, it's about actually losing that fat. And our bodies have been designed to nurture children. So this is why we store fat around our hip and thighs when we're younger in particular, because it's easier to mobilize around pregnancy. And even when you look back at the First and Second World Wars, women on the meager diets that they were given by the Nazis, the small portions, managed to outsurvive men, because our bodies have become adapted to be able to do that. So when we actually attempt to diet, so when we go into this energy deficit, our bodies actually perceive that as that we're trying to starve it. And this is when it activates what's known as the self-defense system. And this is something that is basically also, which Bev's called the title of this webinar, metabolic adaptation. So metabolic adaptation is the adaptations that cause a decrease in our basal metabolic rate, which we'll come on to in a second in a bit more detail. It also reduces our NEAT, which is another thing I'll come on to. But these are elements of our metabolism which are adaptive, and that combined with hormonal changes means that you've got a decrease in your metabolic rate and an increase in your hunger, and it almost makes it impossible to diet unless you're relying like wholly on willpower, which, as we know, is a limited resource. You know, especially the busy lives that we lead. If you come in from work and you're really hungry, it's very, very difficult to resist the temptation when that's what you're relying on. So the body self-defense system works in three ways. So you've got three prongs to it. You've got defend, you've got restore, and you've got prevent. So when it comes to your body defending the whole energy balance in favor of losing weight, the body, what it does is initially you will start to lose some weight, but at some point your metabolism will slow to a point where you'll hit what is often commonly termed as a plateau. So your weight loss stalls, and people think, oh, well, you know, why has this happened? And I suppose the question is, why have our bodies evolved to make it difficult to lose weight but easy to regain it? And the simple answer is that when you're deliberately forcing your body into that energy deficit, it senses that you're trying to starve it, and it basically says, right, okay, let's defend the energy stores that we've got, and we need to put things into action. So that's the defend bit of it. So that when it comes to the restore, this is about the way in which the rate at which you can regain weight after as soon as you start to eat again properly. So we become better at storing fat, and even to an extent that you can actually increase the fat cells. Now that's quite an extreme, but it does happen. And the other thing is that as soon as as I say, food becomes available, then this is when you get people going into binging sessions, because the body is then saying, take as much fuel back on board because we've been denied it for so long. And I think one of the worrying things is that where we actually lose the fat from, so you know, you can't spot reduce fat with the best will in the world. If only we could lose the fat where we wanted to lose it. But if you lose the fat from, say, the top half of your body, which is more common, you can actually then regain it in the lower half. So the redistribution of fat can change. So, and it's then placed in a part of the body that's even harder to lose the next time around. So that's the restore bit. And then the prevent bit is the decreasing the probability of losing weight in the future. So what it's doing is it's defending more staunchly against that depletion in fuel, because it senses what was commonly a famine in our ancestors' days. So you sort of think, well, hang on a second, why is the body worrying too much about food when we have so much food available in today's society? But the reality is, we are still, although this, you know, food's been quite readily available for sort of say the last 100 years, our body is still living, it hasn't caught up in terms of our DNA. So we still think of our body in terms of sort of feast and famine. So we're lagging behind in terms of our DNA, and we still haven't caught up. So when it comes to, as I say, what our ancestors did, our ancestors' DNA stopped them from, it meant that they survived in times of famine. So we've become very, very effective fat storing machines. Sadly.
It's actually exactly why the human race has survived.
Absolutely.
So what we're fighting against now is what actually has been our primitive survival. And I think what's really interesting in what you've just said is that, you know, you get to that point where you plateau, you're on very low calories, you go into that restore, the binge eating. People often think it's an emotional response, a craving that they're sort of emotionally drawn to, when actually it's the body's physiologically crying out for food. So no amount of trying to manage your emotions around it is going to really combat that. And then of course you're left with the emotions that follow, which are guilt, shame, and embarrassment, and and all of the sort of the emotional stuff that goes into creating eating disorders.
That's right.
Which is again another topic for a whole other subject. So can we talk then about what we've talked about? We now know what metabolism is. Let me just recap. So we know what metabolism is. It's that process by which the body takes in energy and utilizes it to survive, and also to give us our ability to move around and do the things we want to. Mm-hmm. We've also learned that if we reduce our calories, there will be a slowing. You can't actually break the metabolism, by the way. When people say you'll wreck your metabolism, you can't. That's a bit of a myth. But it will slow down. It will adapt to the circumstances. So we know what metabolism is doing. Let's talk about, if we can, what happens when we just try and keep reducing. So everybody talks MyFitnessPal. If you do any logging of food, have you ever used MyFitnessPal?
Not MyFitnessPal, but I use Lose It.
Okay, most of these apps, or a lot of these apps, will put an arbitrary figure of 1,200 calories. You need to be on 1,200 calories to lose weight. Doesn't matter whether you're a 17-stone bloke or a not a 4-stone woman, or a 9-stone woman. You get this arbitrary, you've got to be on 1,200 calories to lose weight. Now let's talk, if we can, about the fact that you talked about the basal metabolic rate. Mm-hmm. Now, let me say I come to you and I'm a woman, and I'm kind of maintaining my weight on 2,000 calories, but I would like to lose some weight. And maybe without knowing, but my basal metabolic rate, my basal metabolic needs are, say, 1,400 calories a day. And I go on to 1,200 calories. Tell me what is happening physiologically when I do that.
Okay, so I think there's also these arbitrary figures out there at the minute where women 2,000 calories, men 2,200 calories. But the reality is that 2,000 calories for one woman might actually be too low. It might be too high. There are various calculators out there. And I think you've got one on your page, Bev, that explains. But that is just a starting point. So yes, you're right. Women tend to think, right, okay, I'm going to chop calories right back and I'm going to lose weight. And the case in point, yesterday I was looking at a group that my friend's in, where they were talking about weight loss, something connected to Slimming World or whatever. But the thing that was quite scary was that this lady was saying, oh, I've only lost 2 pounds. And somebody was saying, yes, but if you lose 2 pounds every week for the next however many weeks, that'll be 2 pounds times 26 weeks and you've lost. And the reality is it doesn't, obviously, as we said, it doesn't work like that, because what the body does is you've got various, so your what we call total daily energy expenditure. And there's what they call a metabolic pyramid. So if you imagine a pyramid, and the bottom bit of the pyramid is your basal metabolic rate. And as Bev said, that is the amount of energy that your body needs to deal with the day-to-day, just simple processes. If you sat in a chair and didn't move all day, that is a base amount of calories that the body needs. And then after that, you have something called NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And that is take out of this any planned exercise. So we're not talking about sport or time in the gym or exercise classes. We're just talking about the day-to-day movement. You get out of bed, you go downstairs, you make a cup of coffee, you might do some housework, go to the shops, go for a walk. That is all your non-exercise activity. Included in that is unconscious movements that you don't even realize you're doing, such as blinking, such as fidgeting, twitching, things that you do without even realizing it. So that is a big component. You've then got your exercise activity thermogenesis, and that is your specifically planned exercise. So that is exercise that has what we call a purpose. So that might be, you might want to gain strength, or you might want to build endurance, cardiovascular fitness, and you would do that through, as I say, either playing a sport, going to a gym, but it's something that's structured and it's planned. And that's actually quite a small part. And I think the mistake that a lot of women make is thinking that if they go to the gym and spend hours on the treadmill or the bike, that they're going to burn a lot of calories calories, but the reality is it is quite a small part. It's important because of the benefits you get outside of the calorie reduction, but it's not when it comes to generating an energy deficit. It's not a huge part. And then the final bit is what we call thermic effect of food. So your body actually uses energy to digest food. So you've got what we call macronutrients. So they are protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And each one of those macronutrients actually burns a certain amount of energy to digest the food, protein being the biggest part of that. Now, when you go on a calorie restriction to say 1200 calories, what will happen is your NEAT component is the part that is the biggest adaptation. So you, without realizing it, will start to feel more tired. You might feel cold. You will not want to get up and go to the gym, so that will impact on your time in the gym. You will generally just feel, you'll start to think, energy depletion, you want to sleep more. So it's without you realizing it, your body is reining in the amount of energy that you're expending to compensate for the fact that you're actually taking in less energy. So gradually the two will come to a point where you'll be back in balance again. So you will lose weight, and the time it will take for that energy gap to close will depend on how restrictive that energy or the calorie deficit is. But at some point it will catch up, and the more weight that somebody needs to lose, the longer it will take to happen, but it will happen at some point. And it's at that point that you then stuck at a point, what do I do next? Do I then cut calories again? And this is when it becomes problematic, because how low can you go? 1200 calories is not a lot of calories, but women have been, they're surviving on 800 calorie diets, 600 calories, but not for very long, because you will just feel so tired, so ill, just not, life will just be pretty miserable. So,
and of course, sorry to interrupt. So
yeah.
when we started with my scenario, we were already 200 calories below what our body needs just to exist.
Exactly.
So all our systems are going to start to slow down.
Yeah.
Not just the energy output, but our body will start to shut down the non-essential functions. So that is things like your menstrual cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's nice to be able to reproduce, but we don't need to be able to reproduce to survive. So it will divert its energy needs to survival. So, which is why you quite often hear of, anorexics have no periods.
Yeah.
And it's not even as when you get down to that sort of severe weight loss, the severe calorie restriction in itself can start to shut the process down. And as Tracy quite rightly says, when you get down to sort of 600 calories, a lot of these shake diets and meal replacement diets, they may sell you on the fact that they're packed full of simulated vitamins and, they're fortified, but they're still only 600 calories.
Yeah.
And when your body is slowed down and your weight loss plateaus, you haven't got the energy to increase your output. You haven't got anywhere to go to decrease your input. So where are you left to go?
Yeah.
So you go and binge because that craving kicks in. Back over to you, because I realise I'm stealing your thunder.
No, not at all. And I think it's important to, the things that you mentioned there, Bev, about amenorrhea, where periods stop, as you said, it's not an essential function. So the body will just switch that off. Why would a body allow a woman to become pregnant when it hasn't got the energy to look after the person, let alone the baby that's trying to grow? Simple things. People wonder why they've got brittle nails, why the hair falls out, why the skin's so bad. But these are all the non-essential functions that the body will just sacrifice to keep the energy for the life-sustaining functions that we need. So
the awful contradiction as well is that for the majority of us wanting to lose weight, we're wanting to lose weight so that we improve our self-worth and we feel more attractive. And the very thing we haven't got the energy to do is, that sort of, if your periods have stopped, if you've got no energy, I guarantee your libido is going to have gone as well. So
Yeah.
actually, it's not painting a really good picture of
No.
being on a very low calorie diet.
Yeah,
Let's talk about then what, sorry.
No, I
Go
was just
on.
going to say, so the other aspect obviously is hormones. So we've talked about the metabolic adaptations to the metabolism. So we've said what happens there. But then the other element, which has got a big part to play in weight loss is hormones. And they don't work in isolation. They do have sort of a cascading effect. And there's in the brain, so there's a small but very, very powerful gland. It's about the size of an almond, called the hypothalamus. And it's the master gland in the body. And amongst many other things, what it does control is appetite and hunger. So it is often likened to sort of the managing director of a company. So it's there to direct or to say, this is what we want to happen in the body. And then it uses hormones and it'll send them to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is almost like the operations director. And then it sends the signals out to the body as to what it wants it to do next. So if you think of the hypothalamus, it wants to keep the body in homeostasis, so it wants to keep it in balance. And we all have a set point in what our body will try and defend. So the body's a bit like a thermostat. So when you set your room thermostat to 21 degrees, mine's usually set to 25 because my husband's always freezing, but it will, as it kicks in to 25, it will shut down. Or equally, when the temperature drops, the heating will come back on to bring the temperature back up. And the body does the same thing. So the hypothalamus takes cues from both inside and outside the body. So, for example, if we don't have enough food on board and our blood sugar starts to drop, what the hypothalamus will signal the body to do is you need to eat. So it'll signal the hormones such as ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone, to say, right, we need to eat. And there are a number of hormones that I think when women are concerned, they think of reproductive hormones, they think of estrogen, progesterone, maybe to a lesser extent testosterone. But there are so many other hormones that have a big part to play in driving us to eat. So the metabolic adaptations in terms of slowing things down is one thing, but you've then got hormones that are forcing us to eat. They're telling us that we are not full, we need to eat more, and one of the
Sorry.
that's okay. So one of the key hormones in the body that is central to fat metabolism is a hormone called leptin. And leptin is secreted by our fat cells. So we, again, as I say, we have a set point, and our body knows where it is determined by the fat cells and the leptin that's secreted. So that tells the brain that we've got enough energy on board and we don't need to seek food. Now, once you lose weight and lose fat particularly, because that's obviously what you're trying to do, those fat cells start to shrink, they start to secrete less leptin, and as the leptin secretion reduces, the signal to the brain to say that we're actually full starts to decrease. Now, the other hormone, which I touched on, ghrelin, is a hormone secreted by the stomach, and that is what's known as the hunger hormone. So that's actually then saying, okay, I'm now hungry. So you've got you don't feel your body's being told by leptin that needs energy. You've got your ghrelin telling your body that you need to eat. You've got hormones that your stomach secretes to tell the body that it's satiated, so they start to decrease. So you've got cortisol comes into it, because as soon as you go on any sort of a restriction, it's perceived as a stress by the body, so that hormone increases. So you've got this whole sort of pool of hormones that are starting to circulate in the body that are driving you to eat when you actually don't want to eat. So without keeping those hormones in balance, you are creating a sort of a situation in the body where you're trying to create the deficit by either restricting calories and or exercising, but your body is saying, we need to eat, I want you to eat, you're hungry, and you've got to fight. You're literally trying to fight those signals, and it just becomes so difficult. And the more, so as I said, the things that dictate how your body responds to the self-defense system is how severe the deficit is, how long the diet is, and what you're attempting to do, it just the whole cascade of hormones, metabolism, just as I said earlier on, makes it just so much more difficult, but explains why women shouldn't give themselves a hard time when they just don't succeed at dieting, because.
Okay, I was just going to sort of interject there and say, so we're painting a really negative picture of losing weight. I could understand why at this point somebody was saying, well, what is the point? Is it a waste of time? Am I destined to be carrying this extra body fat, however much it is, all of my life? What we haven't talked about yet, I'm going to come back to the negative bit, because there is a positive, there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
There is light at the end of the tunnel.
But what I would really like you to explain, if you can, Tracy, is what happens. So say my scenario, I was on 2,000 calories. I've gone down to 1,200. I've hit a plateau, so I've gone down to 1,000. Lost a little bit more weight. I've hit another plateau, gone down to 800. I'm really hungry at this point. My hormones are all over the place. My metabolism's slowed right down. I've got no energy. I don't want to have sex. I'm really not feeling great about myself. Sod it. Excuse me. What am I going to do now? Well, I don't want to go back to 2,000 calories, because that's what I was on before, and I was overweight. So I'll be good, and I'll only have 1,800 calories. So we're going from 800 to 18. Talk us through what is likely to happen.
Okay, so if you were on a low amount of calories, so if you're on 1,200 calories and you suddenly decide you're going to increase it by 600 calories overnight, the danger is that, as we said, your body becomes very good at protecting and restoring that energy balance, and it will store that weight so much more quickly. So they say, a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips, and it can be as bad as that, because your body will literally take that energy and store it quickly. So one of the things they talk about is, when you're dieting, is to actually include diet breaks. So when you're going down the way, is actually to give yourself after a certain amount of time, depends on how much weight you're trying to lose, but round about sort of the 8 to 12 weeks, have actually a diet break to give your hormones a chance to rebalance themselves and let your body realize, oh, actually, we're not trying to starve it here. We are, this is not as bad as we thought. Without those diet breaks, what you've got to then do is, if you're going back to trying to get back to a maintenance amount of calories, is bring your body back up very slowly and give you, so the time it takes for your metabolism to slow down as you were going into the deficit, you also need to be conscious that as you increase the calories, that you do it still in a slow way, so you're allowing your body to adapt, so that it doesn't just think that, oh my gosh, there's energy available, let's store it. So it is a process to get yourself back up there. And reverse dieting, I think, is the terminology, Bev, that we come across. And I think,
so of course this is the sensible way to bring us back.
Yes. Yeah.
But what normally happens, I think, is that people don't do it sensibly.
No.
They go, I can't live on this.
Yeah.
I've been doing the juice diet or whatever, and I'm starving. So they go back to having fewer calories than they were having beforehand.
Yeah.
But their body, if you think about it, if you kind of think about it as an analogy, your body systems have slowed right down. So everything is working at this lower level. So actually now your body survives perfectly well, might not be comfortable, but it survives perfectly well on 800 calories.
Yeah.
Now you're giving it 1,800 calories. You've got 1,000 calorie surplus, because your body doesn't need it.
That's right.
Because it's still at a jog rather than a sprint.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is why we often see the weight doesn't just go back on, but it goes on and
more.
Because what you were managing on, what your body was comfortable with, it was running at the same rate as the 2,000 calories.
Yes.
It's no longer running at the same rate. So you've got this big gap where your body's slow, but you're giving it way too much fuel.
Yeah.
So let's talk then, if we can, about what is the sensible way to lose weight, because it isn't a lost cause.
No, not at all.
There is a sensible way, and this is sort of this also meet not just the nutritional and the biological needs of dieting sensibly, but it's actually far better on those emotional needs and the sort of psychological needs around dieting. So
Yeah.
let's start with our lady who's on 200 calories. What would be a sensible way for her to look at weight loss?
Okay, so what the recommendations are is that you don't attempt to lose more than 1% of your total body weight per week. So, for example, if somebody was 200 pounds, you wouldn't be looking at more than 2 pounds a week. And we're talking fat loss. And there is a difference. I think a lot of people say, oh, I've lost 2 pounds in weight. But the reality is that of that 2 pounds, the likelihood is there will be a bit of fat loss, a bit of water, and depending on which way you're going about the diet, could potentially be more lean mass. So 1% at the most, but on average about 0.7 to 0.8%. Now that doesn't seem a lot, but what you're trying to create is not, it's not saying to somebody, you're now on a diet and you're going to follow this diet for however long. You're wanting them to effectively not feel like they're on a diet, because they say the best diet is the one you don't even realize you're on. So so you've got to think that, is this something I can see myself doing in a year's time? So because of the age that we're talking about, so midlife menopausal women, our bodies don't react very well to stress, so we become more stress resistant and stress reactive, and insulin resistant, and that in itself creates a very negative system within the body when it comes to weight loss. So starting with a very gentle restriction and looking at physical activity, because physical activity is a big part. So we're not, because if you go into a huge energy deficit, calorie deficit, and then incorporate an awful lot of exercise, again, that's a huge stress on the body. And as we said, we don't react very well to stress as we age. The impacts of cortisol, are well documented. It's, acute cortisol is fine, but when it's elevated, and a diet would produce elevated cortisol levels, especially some of the circumstances you were describing, Bev, where people are going into quite a significant calorie deficit, that places a huge strain on the body. And then you're then into the realms of things like binge eating, because cortisol activates the center of the brain that makes you want to go for all the foods that you don't want, so comfort foods. And this is why women say, oh, I'm constantly craving sweet things, but this is the stress effect. When it comes to insulin resistance, that is really important. So insulin is a hormone that's released from the pancreas. That's an organ that just sits in the upper abdomen, just above the stomach. And when you eat particularly carbohydrates and protein, but more so carbohydrates, the body releases insulin, the idea being that the carbohydrates raise the blood sugar levels, and you want to bring that back down to a normal level. So insulin will take that sugar and take it away into the cells for energy. Now, as you become resistant to insulin as we age, it's a part of what comes with estrogen reducing. So it is a common problem. It means that it becomes more difficult to get rid of that excess energy. And if you're in a calorie surplus, for example, that excess energy will be stored as fat. So in a calorie deficit with insulin resistance, what you want to do is look at your carbohydrates and eat carbohydrates that are less refined, less processed. We're not saying take carbohydrates out of the diet, because I think I think a lot of women think carbohydrates are the devil and that we shouldn't eat them, but they're an essential part of our diet. They do provide us with good energy, and they do feed our gut bacteria, which is a whole webinar in itself.
Yeah.
But you need to be looking at things like complex carbohydrates, so fruit and fiber from vegetables that don't spike your insulin levels, so it keeps your blood glucose more under control, because cortisol and insulin have an opposing effect. So when cortisol's high, insulin is reacting. So sorry, Bev, you were gonna?
No, I'm very conscious that there was a huge amount of information in there.
Okay.
Huge amount. If I can just stop for a second and just sort of recap, because there was a huge amount in there. So basically what Tracy is sort of saying in terms of losing weight sensibly is to, if I can recap, is to aim for 1% of your overall body weight per week, no more.
Yeah,
So
normal,
that
absolutely.
for the
At the worst
majority,
extreme,
as a goal, it's going to be between 1 to 1.5 pounds.
Yes.
That's not going to be an exact figure, but as a rule of thumb, 1% will equate roughly around there.
Yeah.
By doing it gently, by doing it gradually over a period of time and not looking for that all or nothing quick fix, you're less likely to create an insulin resistance.
Yeah.
And when you're insulin resistant, it's actually much harder because your body isn't getting rid of the fat stores. It's storing them.
Yeah, what it's doing is it's not able to take that excess sugar that's in the system away. And this is when you start having cravings for carbohydrates, because the insulin levels remain high. Then that signals to the brain that you need more carbohydrates. So this is why you get when you eat, say, crisps, potatoes, rice, whatever, when insulin resistance exists, you just crave more carbohydrates in response to the fact that those insulin levels are high, because it needs carbohydrate to actually have something to take that insulin down. So it's almost like a vicious circle. So it's the type of carbohydrates that has a big impact on controlling insulin levels.
Let's talk about the macronutrients in a different training, because I'm conscious that we're kind of coming to the end of the session. And I just really want to clarify those last few bits. So they're more of a sort of an implement. they're all
there.
Really, I suppose what I'm wanting to try and funnel this down to is some key implementable points. So the theory is great, and this is why I love what you do, because you have so much depth of knowledge, and the knowledge is good. But ultimately, what we want to know is we've kind of we're aware now that if we cut our calories too much, it's going to have a very detrimental effect, and where chances are we're going to put on as much, if not more, weight. So that's fine. We've understood the mechanics of why that is important. In terms of how we go about losing weight, then it's really actually very simple. You just reduce your overall amount a little bit. And it sounds simplistic, and I'm very conscious that I'm not talking about all the psychological issues, the emotional eating needs, and that sort of thing. The practical side of it, If you create a small energy deficit through your food and increase that energy deficit through your output, through movement, over a prolonged period of time, you're not going to get that metabolic adaptation to the same extent. It will still happen, because whenever you reduce your calorie intake, there will be some adaptation, but it'll be in such a slow, gentle, gradual manner that the body has time to adapt and catch up, and you don't have that big sort of rise again when you go out and have a bit of a blowout.
And I think one thing that women often physical activity is a huge part, not just for the purpose of losing weight, but just all the added benefits, just the stress reduction, the cardiovascular benefits. It's an important part. But I think the element of physical activity, or when we talk about more planned exercise, is the resistance training, Bev. And I think that is a really big part of what women should factor in.
Definitely.
And when we talk about resistance training, it doesn't have to be lifting heavy weights in the gym. It can start from as basic as bodyweight exercises, progressing from there to resistance bands, or and even if you want to go into a gym, kettlebells, whatever, but some form of resistance. Because again, the other thing, as we age, we have what we call sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss. And if you try to maintain your muscle mass, and maybe even increase a little bit of that muscle, that will help to offset some of the metabolic adaptations, because it will it is a big part of what goes into lean tissue, is more metabolically active. And I think women do panic at the idea of sort of resistance training. They think they're going to end up with great big huge muscles. I wish, but the reality is it doesn't work like that. But the bone, we lose bone as we age. The bone density goes. So it's got so many benefits. It helps to improve insulin. We've talked about insulin resistance. It helps to improve that. It just makes you stronger, able to carry on doing the day-to-day things that you're used to doing, lifting shopping bags in and out of the car, putting shopping away, turning mattresses, all the things that as we age become difficult. So there are so many benefits if it's incorporated as part of this overall drive to lift, to shift some of the excess weight. So I think that is a big strategy that often gets overlooked.
Definitely. I think what we need to do is maybe do a training. There is some training in the exercise element of the Fabulous Butterfly Club that talks about components of fitness, and it talks about strength, endurance, it talks about flexibility and all the other elements. I'll put in some training specifically on resistance training, and I think we'll do that as another training, because that is a whole, there's a whole piece in terms of the benefits of including resistance training for weight loss and for quality of life.
Absolutely.
Very conscious that we're at the hour. Wendy, that's a huge amount of information.
Sorry, Wendy.
I've actually written an article that kind of preces all of this that I'm going to put out as a blog anyway. I'm also going to do a short, sort of abridged version of this as a presentation, sort of bringing out the key points of what Tracy's covered tonight, and in sort of using the blog, the shorter training, and this training gives you sort of the in-depth, the key points, and the ability to sort of go over and read it in more depth through the blog. But have you got anything that you would like to ask? I've just realised that I didn't really ask any. I didn't find gaps to ask you if you understood, and you didn't shout up, and I know you would if you needed to. Any questions or anything you'd like us to clarify?
Well, I think it was all really, really interested, and some of the things I knew, and a lot of the things I just hadn't connected the dots. What I have been sat there thinking is, what on earth do I eat?
You can eat anything you want, and I think that's the key to this, is that it's not about taking out big swathes of food from the diet. Unless you have an allergy or an intolerance to a certain food, there is no reason to cut out anything. However, if you're trying to lose weight, eating whole natural foods is going to give you the fuel and the nutrition you need. If your diet is predominantly processed, highly processed, fast foods, then I guarantee you, if you create a deficit on crap food, you will lose weight. You won't feel great, because that law of thermodynamics is still going to be there. As long as you're eating fewer calories than you're burning, you will lose weight, but you will feel rubbish. So, I personally work on a rule of fifths. So if I can't be bothered to track, if I don't want to be counting calories, which, calories count, people think they don't, but any diet that tells you that calories don't count is rubbish. However, you don't have to be counting calories. I work on a rule of fifths, which just means I try and skim off a fifth of every meal I eat. And if you think about that, that's 20% of your calories over the day gone. So a 20% deficit is actually quite a big deficit. It's not and it's only going to be guesswork if you're taking a fifth. You're not going to be measuring it.
So as I have quite a healthy diet already, and I do walk the dog for about an hour and a half every day. I do an hour's yoga a week, an hour's Pilates a week. What I'm looking at doing is really to cut down the amount of food I'm eating, really.
Yeah.
But
and the rule of fifths would work quite well for you, I think, if you don't want to go through the faff of logging everything in your calorie counter, or there are things like hand portion measurements that work quite well. It depends how. Some people love tracking because it actually gives them control. I think it's about finding what works for you. Yeah. If tracking works for you, that's great. All I would say is tracking can become a bit obsessive. So what ultimately we want to aim for is a sense of intuitive eating, where we listen to our body's cues, we work to our hunger cues, and we eat intuitively. That is very hard for somebody who's not eaten intuitively for 50 years.
Yeah, and I think it's for anybody that's sort of dieted on and off over the years, as I was saying before, those hormonal signals won't necessarily be accurate enough to be able to listen to. If there's one piece of advice I would say, Wendy, is one thing women are notoriously bad at is eating enough protein. And just make sure, and I think the protein at breakfast in particular, I think women tend to eat sort of a carbohydrate-based breakfast.
No, I do.
And it's and the thing is, the amount of protein increases as we age, because we obviously, as I said about the sarcopenia, that we are losing lean tissue as we age, and protein is not just about men in the gym wanting to build loads of muscle. It's important for all tissue repair in the body. So an adequate amount of protein is roughly about, I mean, they say work on lean mass, but as a rough guide, if you worked on a gram per pound of body weight, that would give you a rough estimate. And it's quite surprising how much that is, but it's also not difficult to do if you make sure that at every meal, the basis of the meal is protein, and you build around that. So, you know, there's the plates that you see where you have protein, bit of carbohydrates, bit of fat, but make protein the starting point and then build your plate around that, because that will make sure that for every pound of weight you lose, the majority of it comes from fat and not from lean tissue. And it's the most satiating of the nutrients, so you will feel fuller, and it burns more calories than any other nutrient. So the actual net win-win with protein. So I think if you can do nothing else, and I've got no idea what your diet is, Wendy. I mean, I'm not trying to presume, but I would say think about protein, because it will help you to maintain a deficit if that's what you're looking for, and not be constantly hungry and reaching for the things that you want to avoid.
I think my diet's very carb heavy.
Yes,
and women,
that is
it's common.
It is common.
It's not poor, but it is.
No, it's
I think the problem is we were brought up as a generation. We were brought up on the low fat, high carb methodology,
right.
And it's inherent in us. And actually, eating fat, if we've got a belief system that says fat makes us fat, can be really, really difficult. But as women go through their midlife, fat is essential for hormone creation.
That's right.
So if you're not getting enough fat and you're not getting enough protein, and the majority of diet is coming from carbohydrate, then actually your hormones aren't getting what they need, and you're more likely to be hungry. We'll go into the whole sort of insulin sugar wave another time, but I think the truth is, you know, I hear lots of people, and this isn't pointing the finger at you, Wendy, but I hear a lot of women say, I don't know why I put weight on, I eat a really healthy diet. But if you think of that basic law of thermodynamics, it doesn't matter how healthy your diet is or how unhealthy it is, if the energy balances out,
you will still gain weight.
And sometimes if we're eating healthy foods, we overeat because we think they're healthy. Whereas we might look at a bit of pizza and think, well, I'll only have one piece because it's not very healthy. But then we'll have a ton of rice. Now, I'm not of the carbs are the enemy school at all. But we do tend to get the balance wrong, which is actually why there's a hand. I think I've put a hand portion guide in the
with the palm of the hand. And
if I haven't, it doesn't really matter. But even if it's, I'll put it in. The beauty of the hand measurements is it gives you a kind of a guide for how much protein, how much fat, how much starchy carbohydrates, and how much vegetables, because vegetables are carbohydrates. We don't, and fruits and veg are, but we don't tend to think of them as when we think of carbs, we tend to think of potatoes, bread, and all the starchy ones. But what the hands portions do is actually give you an understanding of where the proportionate amounts of each of the macronutrients in your diet should come from. So if you've got sort of 3 fists loads of rice and only a thumb-sized piece of protein, you know you've got that balance wrong. So I think what we, you know, as time goes on, we can certainly, in the coaching sessions, talk about more specifically what your diet looks like and how you can make small changes. For me, the key to losing weight, if somebody said, what's the perfect diet? I would say it's the patient's diet.
Yeah, the one that you want, the one that you choose to be on.
Yeah, the one that you've got the patience to stick with.
Because it's a lifestyle. This is something that you are choosing to follow now for the rest of your life. So you don't want to be cutting out anything. You don't want to be stopping yourself from having anything. The more there's this polar bear effect, and the more you tell yourself you can't have something, the more your brain wants it. So you think about it more. So this is why as soon as you think I'm on a diet, it conjures up negative messages in the brain, and from there it just becomes a struggle, because it's I can't have this and I mustn't have that. Just being talking to a friend of mine today who said, well, I can't have bread and I can't have this, and I was like, why can't you have bread?
Have whatever you like, unless you've got an allergy to it. Have it.
Just factor it in the same way you can have the treats, as long as you find treats that are treats that you can have one and put it back, and not the ones where you can't stop. But
have you looked at excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Have you looked at the nutrition element at the 80-20 video?
What, sorry?
Have you looked in the Fabulous Butterfly members area at the 80-20? And under nutrition, there's a video called the 80-20 principle.
Yes, I need to look at it again.
Yeah, that will be really useful for you, because that is the whole essence of 80-20 is that you get 80% of your foods from good, nutritious, whole foods that are going to nourish your body and give you all the vitamins, nutrients, and all the other bits that you need. But for your sanity and for your social needs, 20% of your calories come from the nicer stuff. At the end of the day, food should be enjoyed. It shouldn't be a restriction. It shouldn't be something that is either good or bad. It's just more nutritious or less nutritious. So 20% would come from the less nutritious elements. So your bit of cake, your glass of wine, and all the rest of it. But ultimately, 80% comes from the good stuff, for lack of a better way of putting it, the nutritious stuff. 20% is your sanity foods. And actually, if you can think of it like that, where it takes away all the guilt, and it takes away this all or nothing, on or off, on the wagon, off the wagon, because nothing. One of the terms that I hate is, can I have that on the plan? Well, you're not on a plan. You're in your life, and your life is gonna. You can't be on a plan for the rest of your life. So it's about finding ways to incorporate a health, not necessarily a healthier diet, but a slight restriction in your calorie needs without restricting specific foods. If that makes sense. Just
be kind to yourself, Wendy, because I think it's a time of life. So much is going on in our bodies. We've got so many things. We've got hormones fluctuating, and we've got I think they call us the sandwich generation now, don't they? We're sort of stuck between sort of aging parents, if they're still around, and families, and getting fixated on, I must lose this weight and I've got to do this, and just find something that works for you, and don't think about necessarily taking things away. Think about things that you can add. So like I said, add a little bit more protein, rather than saying, well, I'm going to cut this out. Think about maybe substituting, as Bev said, a little bit of your starchy carbohydrate for so your non-starchy, so a little bit more veg and a little bit less of your potatoes, but not just
not extreme.
Yeah, not extreme. And if you do have a day where you just think, oh my God, that was just rubbish, don't think, well, that's it, I might as well just forget it for the rest of the week and I'll start again on Monday. Just think that was just not the best, but that's fine. It's not the end of the world, and I'll just continue. And
it's the slight edge.
It is. Yeah, yes. Absolutely.
It is the slight edge. It's exactly what Jeff Olson is talking about. It's that small cumulative gains
will get big results in the end.
Yeah. Any other questions, Wendy, before I get into trouble from my other half, because my dinner's sat on the table?
Oh, right. Might have all come in, haven't they?
We met all your family, Wendy.
Anything else, my love?
No, I think I'm good. I need to sit down with some books and recipe books and have a look and see what I can come up with.
Yeah, small changes is the key, and just every day, a little bit. Just move the needle slightly. Doesn't have to be a big restriction. Just if every day you make those slight edge changes, it's actually amazing how quickly they add up. Fab, I will put this into, because it's recorded.
I'll be a star of the Butterfly Club.
I'll put this into the members area. I'll get the other presentation created and put in there hopefully by the end of the week. There's more recipes going in this week as well, so there'll be more for you to try. All of the recipes that I use follow that 80-20 principle, in as much as they would form the 80%, if you like. So they're all sort of well balanced and well put together. Tracy, thank you so much. I know this must have been really difficult for you, because you've already gone through this once, and it's difficult when. Say again.
I've said different audience.
Absolutely, yeah, different audience. So,
thank you, Tracy.
I hope you've enjoyed it, Wendy. I know it's a lot of information to take in, but as Bev said, you can always just go back, and she's going to summarize it anyway. So I hope you picked out just one or two.
I've got my notes.
And last but not least, congratulations! You have got an accountability post going out to you tomorrow, because tomorrow was the deadline, wasn't it? And I'm going to leave it there so that you could do a big woo! I did it.
I was going to do it today, and then I thought, no, I'm going to save it and
see a deadline. We'll be back on Tuesday for our next group coaching session. You're very welcome to come along to that, Tracy, if you want to. It's a Zoom session. We do live coaching.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to see how that sort of works, you're very welcome.
8 o'clock, Bev.
8 o'clock on Tuesday.
I'm out. I'll miss it.
No worries. We can catch it on the replay. If you've got any questions that you want me to answer, drop them into the Facebook group before Tuesday, and I'll answer them on the call.
Okay.
And then you can catch that, because I will record it.
Okay.
All right. Guys, thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks. Bye, Wendy.
See you later.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye.